The rain fell in thin silver threads, stitching the empty streets into a kind of solemn hush. It wasn't the kind of downpour that made you rush for cover, but the slow, persistent kind that soaked through everything: your clothes, your bones, your thoughts. Keanu pulled the brim of his cap lower as he stepped onto the platform. The train station, usually a noisy artery of life, was deserted tonight. Only a few flickering fluorescent lights cast pale halos on the slick concrete. Somewhere down the line, a stray dog barked once, then went quiet. He liked nights like these, when the world seemed to forget itself, when he could move without being noticed, without anyone whispering or pointing or asking for something he wasn't sure he could give. That's when he saw a figure sitting alone on a wooden bench, hunched over like he was trying to fold himself into something smaller, less visible. His clothes were dark and rumpled, his sneakers soaked through. One hand gripped a crumpled piece of paper so tightly that even from a distance, Keanu could see the tremble in his knuckles. There was something about the way the man sat, not drunk, not strung out, just unbearably still, like someone who had already decided something and was only waiting for the clock to catch up. Keanu hesitated. It wasn't his place. People carried their own storms. Sometimes stepping into them only made things worse. But something deeper, older inside him stirred. The part that remembered what it felt like to sit alone and hope no one would see you breaking. He walked toward the man slowly, letting his boots scuff the concrete loud enough to announce himself without startling. The man didn't look up. Keanu stopped a few feet away, close enough to speak without raising his voice. "Hey," he said softly, almost swallowed by the rain. "You all right?" The man flinched slightly, as if the words themselves hurt. His head lifted just a little. Dark eyes, ringed with exhaustion, flickered up and then away again. "Fine," he muttered. It was the kind of fine that meant the exact opposite. Keanu didn't press. He sank down onto the opposite end of the bench, leaving a respectful stretch of wet wood between them. He pulled off his cap, letting the rain soak into his hair. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The train station hummed with the low buzz of failing lights and the occasional rattle of wind through the girders. Keanu watched the man from the corner of his eye, the paper in his hand. No, not just paper. A letter, folded and refolded so many times it was beginning to fall apart at the creases. The man noticed Keanu looking and tensed, as if expecting judgment or pity. Keanu only offered a quiet nod, a small permission. "You don't have to explain." The man stared at the letter like it was a living thing, something that might bite if he loosened his grip. "I never sent it," he said hoarsely, more to himself than to Keanu. Keanu waited. The man shook his head, the movement small, helpless. Too late now. The rain softened, turning into a mist that blurred the edges of the world. Keanu leaned back against the bench, feeling the chill seep into his spine. "Sometimes it's not too late," he said, voice low and even. "Sometimes the only thing too late is the thing you never try." The man laughed once, bitter and small. "You don't know," he said. "You don't know what I did." Keanu's eyes stayed steady on him, kind but unflinching. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe not. But I know what it feels like to want to take it back." The man turned to him fully now, studying his face for the first time. There was a flicker of recognition, but it faded under the weight of his own grief. Tonight, names and fame didn't matter. Only the rain, only the letter, only the broken thing between them. The station loudspeaker crackled to life, announcing a delayed arrival, the voice distorted and ghostly. Neither man moved. Keanu drew a slow breath. "If you're waiting for the right time," he said quietly, "sometimes you have to make it yourself." The man stared at the letter a moment longer, then crumpled it tighter in his fist, like trying to crush the regret out of it. Keanu didn't push. He just sat there, sharing the rain, sharing the silence. And in that small, soaked corner of the world, two men carried their invisible weights together, without fanfare, without fixing anything. Yet, but maybe, just maybe, stopping the worst from happening. The train's headlights pierced the mist down the track, growing brighter, closer. Keanu stood, brushing the rain from his jacket. He turned to the man, offering a hand without words. For a long, fragile moment, the man didn't move. Then slowly, with a tremble, he reached out and took it. The night train to nowhere was pulling in, and maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't ride it alone. The doors of the train slid open with a sigh, exhaling a breath of stale warmth into the rain-cooled night. For a moment, neither of them moved. They simply stood there on the slick platform, two shadows wavering under the fractured lights. Keanu gave the man's hand a slight squeeze before letting go. He didn't lead, didn't push. He just waited. A silent offer. "Walk with me if you want." The man hesitated, looking down at his ruined sneakers, the dripping letter still clutched in his other hand. Somewhere deep inside him, something flickered. A tiny ember stubborn against the wet dark of the world. He stepped forward. The train was almost empty. Only a handful of passengers huddled in scattered seats, lost in their own late-night solitudes. Keanu led them toward the rear, choosing a pair of seats by the window. The man slid into the one across from him, movements stiff and reluctant, like someone afraid of being seen but too tired to keep hiding. The train jolted into motion, pulling them away from the station, away from the heavy weight of standing still. Outside, the rain turned the world into a blur of silver and shadow. Streetlights smeared into long, trembling lines. Buildings rose and fell like passing dreams. Keanu rested his elbows on his knees, leaning forward slightly. He didn't speak, not right away. Some silences were too heavy to be broken by small talk. The man unfolded the letter with trembling fingers. The paper was so soaked and wrinkled it looked ready to fall apart. He stared at it for a long time, his lips moving silently as he reread words he could probably recite by heart. Finally, in a voice so raw it almost wasn't sound at all, he whispered, "It was for my brother." Keanu lifted his gaze, steady and patient. The man laughed bitterly, a sound like broken glass. Not that it matters now, he's gone. Keanu didn't flinch, didn't offer quick comforts or empty condolences. He knew, from the marrow out, that some losses couldn't be cushioned by well-meaning words. "I wrote it years ago," the man continued, his voice cracking under the strain. "After the fight, after the things we said." "Eh?" He shook his head slowly, as if still trying to comprehend the weight of it. "I never sent it. I kept thinking, maybe tomorrow, maybe when I'm less angry, less ashamed." He laughed again, softer this time, almost tender in its self-loathing. But tomorrow just kept getting farther away. Keanu leaned back, the train's gentle sway rocking him slightly. "I think," he said quietly, "we all think we have more time." The man wiped at his face roughly, as if trying to erase the emotion crawling there. "I kept telling myself I'd fix it, that we'd sit down, laugh about how stupid it was. Like it was a movie, you know? Like there's always a third act where it all gets tied up neatly." Keanu smiled faintly, an expression touched with something older and sadder than words. "Real life," he murmured, "is messier." The man nodded, folding the letter again with painful care. "I missed his wedding," he said, "missed his kid being born. Every time something good happened, I told myself I couldn't just show up after everything I'd done. And when things went bad," he trailed off, staring out the rain-warped window, "I figured he didn't want me there anyway." The train rattled over a crossing, the wheels clattering like distant thunder. Keanu watched him for a moment longer, then spoke with a softness that cut deeper than any sharpness ever could. "Maybe he did," he said. "Maybe he was waiting too." The man swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. The lights overhead flickered briefly, plunging the car into momentary shadow before humming back to life. The man opened his mouth, closed it, then finally said, "Why are you even talking to me?" Keanu tilted his head slightly, considering. "Because once," he said, "I needed someone to talk to, and no one came." The answer was simple. Not a confession, not a plea for sympathy, just a fact. The man looked at him for a long time, really looked, and something in his face shifted. The armor cracked, just a little. He nodded, a sharp jerk of his chin, as if accepting a pact neither of them had formally spoken. The train sped on, carving through the night like a needle through worn cloth, stitching two broken stories together with each passing mile. Keanu leaned back, closed his eyes for a moment, and let the rhythm of the train fill the aching spaces between them. Outside, the world blurred past, a silent, forgiving witness. And somewhere, tucked safe between two hearts not yet mended, but not abandoned either, a broken letter waited. Maybe, just maybe, not to be sent, but to be heard. The train rolled through sleeping towns and nameless fields, its windows glowing faintly against the darkness. Inside, the world shrank to a humming cocoon of tired faces, whispered announcements, and the occasional soft clatter of luggage shifting with the turns. The man sat slumped against the window, watching the raindrops race each other down the glass. His reflection stared back at him, blurred and distorted, a stranger shaped by regret. Across from him, Keanu sat quietly, arms folded loosely, gaze turned inward. He wasn't there to interrogate or to fix. He was simply there. Time stretched thin, like a thread pulled too taut. Neither of them spoke. Words felt too small for the spaces they needed to fill. The man shifted, his voice rough when it finally broke the hush. "Why are you even on this train?" Keanu opened his eyes slowly, as if surfacing from somewhere deeper. "Needed to be somewhere else," he said simply. The man gave a short, humorless laugh. "Anywhere but here, right?" Keanu smiled faintly, a smile worn smooth by long use. "Sometimes," he said, "you think you're running from something, then you realize you're really just chasing something you lost." The man turned that over in his mind, the way you turn a stone in your palm, feeling its weight, its hidden edges. Keanu's gaze drifted back to the window, to the rain-drenched world slipping by. "A few," he said quietly. "More than I could count sometimes." The man waited, sensing there was more, but knowing better than to press. "My best friend," Keanu said after a long silence. My daughter. Her mother." The words were stripped bare, spoken without embellishment. The man looked down at the letter in his lap, feeling suddenly unworthy of the grief he'd been drowning in. His pain had been real, yes, but so had the walls he'd built around it, the mistakes he hadn't dared to mend. "You still write to them?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Keanu shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "Not anymore." He turned to face the man fully, and for the first time his voice had a gravity that pressed down, not heavy, but steady. "But I talk to them sometimes, quietly, when no one's around." The man nodded slowly, his throat thick with something unspeakable. He unfolded the letter again, smoothing it with careful fingers, as if trying to will it back to life. The ink was smudged in places, the words almost illegible. But he didn't need to read it. He knew every line. "Should have said it when I had the chance," he whispered. "I should have been there." Keanu leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. "You're here now," he said gently. "That counts for something." The man shook his head, a sharp jerk filled with anger, but not at Keanu, at himself. "It doesn't bring him back." "No," Keanu agreed. "It doesn't." He paused, searching for the right thread in the tangled web between them. "But you heard it might bring you back. What do you want to your..." The train rattled into another station, a ghost town at this hour. No one got on. No one got off. The man stared out into the wet dark, his breath fogging the window. "How do you forgive yourself?" he asked, so quietly it might have been a thought escaping his lips. Keanu's answer came without hesitation, like something he had carried for a long, long time. "You don't," he said. "Not all at once. Not completely. Some things you carry The man closed his eyes, the truth of it cutting deeper than any judgment ever could. "You just carry it," Keanu repeated, softer now, "and you try to carry it differently." The rhythm of the train wrapped around them, a steady, ceaseless lullaby for the wounded and the wandering. Minutes bled into miles. Miles folded into memories. At some point the man dozed off, the letter slipping from his fingers to rest on the floor between them. Keanu stayed awake, watching over him. Not because he had to, not because he thought he could save him, but because sometimes the most important thing you could do for someone was simply to stay. Outside, the rain began to ease, the clouds thinning to reveal bruises of silver and indigo across the night sky. The journey wasn't over. The road back to hope, to forgiveness, it would be long and broken and uncertain. But tonight, on a half-empty train bound for nowhere in particular, 2 lives had shifted. 2 strangers had shared the heavy silence between heartbeats. And somewhere, deep inside both of them, a small, stubborn light refused to go out. The man stirred awake with a sharp breath, the kind that comes from dreams too heavy to bear. He blinked against the dim light of the train, momentarily disoriented, his fingers grasping at empty air until they found the letter crumpled on the floor. Keanu was still there, still seated across from him, steady as a lighthouse through the storm. For a moment the man said nothing. He simply sat there, feeling the weight of the unsent words in his hands. The train had slowed. Out the window an unfamiliar station loomed, nothing more than a cracked platform under a flickering lamp. Beyond it, the world dissolved into rain and shadow. Keanu rose first, slinging his worn jacket over one shoulder. He offered a nod toward the doors. "Next stop's as good as any," he said, a half-smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The man hesitated, then followed. They stepped into the rain, the cold biting sharper now, the mist thick enough to blur the outlines of buildings, trees, even the path ahead. The platform was deserted. The station building, if it could be called that, was a sagging skeleton of wood and peeling paint. A single payphone clung stubbornly to the wall, its receiver hanging by a frayed cord. They found a rusted awning to shelter under, the tin roof pinging with the rhythm of falling water. Keanu pulled a battered thermos from his jacket pocket, unscrewing the cap and offering it across the small space between them. The man accepted it wordlessly, the heat of the coffee blooming in his cold fingers more comforting than he expected. They drank in silence for a while, the rain stitching invisible seams between their solitude. Finally Keanu spoke, his voice low but firm. "Tell me about him." The man swallowed hard. "Ham was the good one," he said, almost laughing. "The one who always showed up, you know?" Keanu nodded, his eyes dark with understanding. "Birthdays, bailouts, broken hearts, he was there, even when you didn't deserve it." The man stared out into the rain, the memory of his brother so vivid it hurt. "And me?" he continued, voice bitter. "I was the one who burned it all down, always chasing something, money, pride, some idea of what I thought I deserved." He clutched the letter tighter, the paper soggy now, bleeding ink onto his palm. I thought if I made enough noise, if I got big enough, he'd have to see me." Keanu's voice was barely a whisper. He already did. The man squeezed his eyes shut against the sudden rush of grief. "I missed his funeral," he said brokenly. "Did you know that? I couldn't even get on the plane. Couldn't face it." The rain drummed harder, as if the sky itself grieved with him. Keanu stayed silent, letting the confession bleed out into the mist. "He died thinking I hated him," the man said. "And all because I couldn't pick up the damn phone?" Keanu stepped closer, the distance between them closing like the drawing of a breath. "He died knowing you were his brother," he said simply. "No mistake, no fight, no silence could erase that." The man shook his head violently, but Keanu didn't waver. "You're still here," Keanu said. "You're still carrying him. That's what matters now." The words lodged deep, somewhere under the layers of guilt and self-loathing. For a long moment they stood there, 2 men with wounds invisible to the world, stitched up only by the act of being witnessed. The rain softened again, a gentle sigh across the rooftops. The man looked down at the letter, the ink now a blurred mess. "It's ruined," he said, voice cracking. Keanu's gaze didn't falter. "Maybe it needed to be," he said. "Maybe you're not supposed to send the old words. Maybe you're supposed to find new ones." The man stared at him, something raw and bewildered sparking behind his tired eyes. "New ones?" Keanu nodded. "Not to the brother you lost," he said. "To the brother who's still with you, here." He tapped lightly over his own heart. The man's mouth opened, then closed. No words came, only a single tear, slipping free and cutting a clean line down the grime of his face. The train behind them shuddered and pulled away into the mist, leaving them alone with the rain, the wreckage, and, maybe, the first fragile beams of something like healing. Keanu reached out, not with grand gestures or hollow promises, but with something simpler, real. A hand on the shoulder, a squeeze that said, "You're not alone." The man sagged under the touch, not breaking, but bending, the first surrender in a war he hadn't even realized he was still fighting. They stood like that for a long time under the broken awning while the rain washed the last of the night's poison away. Above them, the clouds thinned, revealing the faintest edge of dawn, a fragile line of silver cutting through the endless gray. The past couldn't be rewritten, the letter couldn't be unsent. But maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over yet. The rain slowed to a mist, curling around their shoulders like breath, soft and lingering. The world beyond the broken station was still a blur of damp fields and silent roads, a nowhere place where no one asked questions and no one needed answers too fast. Keanu leaned back against a cracked pillar, his arms loosely crossed, eyes studying the fading storm. The man wiped his face with the sleeve of his jacket, the tear tracks still raw on his cheeks. His fingers fumbled with the ruined letter, now no more than a soggy memory folded in his palm. "I don't know who I am without him," he said, after a long silence, the words falling heavy between them. Keanu's voice was calm when it came. "You're not supposed to be the same," he said. "Loss carves into you. It leaves marks. You're not who you were before. And that's okay." The man sat down heavily on the low stone curb as if the weight of understanding was too much to bear standing. He turned the letter over and over, like a prayer he no longer knew how to say. Keanu stayed quiet, letting the space breathe between them. Then, slowly, he pushed away from the pillar and sank down beside him, shoulder to shoulder. "You want to know something?" Keanu said, voice low and steady. The man glanced sideways, wary but listening. Keanu pulled something from his jacket, a worn, creased piece of paper of his own. He held it out, palm up. The man hesitated, then took it. It was a photograph. Faded, torn at the edges, a young woman smiling into the sun, her hair tangled by the wind, and beside her a man, younger, lighter somehow, with Keanu's unmistakable eyes. "My sister," Keanu said simply. "Kim." The man traced the worn lines of the photo with trembling fingers. "I used to think I could outrun the hurt," Keanu continued, his gaze far away. "Work enough, move enough, give enough. Maybe it wouldn't catch me." He shook his head slightly, a grim smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "But grief's not something you outrun, it lives with you, it moves him." The man handed the photo back with reverence, as if it might shatter under his touch. "What happened to her?" he asked, almost afraid to know. Keanu tucked the photo carefully back into his jacket. "Cancer," he said quietly. "Young, too young." He exhaled slowly, a sound full of all the years he'd carried it alone. "I wasn't there enough," Keanu said. "I thought I had time. She told me once that she didn't need me to fix it, she just needed me to show up." The man swallowed hard, the words hammering straight into the hollow places inside him. "And did you?" he asked, voice rough. Keanu's eyes met his, steady and unflinching. "I did," he said. "In the end, I sat with her, I held her hand, I listened. I let her be scared without trying to make it go away. The man bowed his head, his hands clenching into fists around the ruined letter. "You think it was enough?" Keanu was silent for a long moment. "It has to be," he said finally, "because it's all we ever really have. The being there, the sitting in the dark with someone. That's what love looks like when everything else falls away." The mist lifted a little more, revealing a pale ribbon of dawn unraveling across the horizon. For the first time, the man realized the station was beginning to stir. A single overhead light flickered to life, a signal that morning was claiming the broken pieces of night. He unfolded the letter one last time, the ink barely legible, the paper frayed like the edges of his heart. He tore it carefully in half, and then again until the pieces fluttered down onto the wet stone like snow. Keanu watched, no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. The man drew a shuddering breath. "I can't change the past," he said hoarsely. Keanu shook his head. "No," he said, "but you can honor it." The man nodded, slow and solemn, as if each vertebrae had to remember how to move again. He stood, shoulders squared not with false bravado but with something steadier, the rough beginnings of acceptance. Keanu rose too, brushing the rain from his sleeves. "Where will you go?" the man asked. Keanu smiled, a soft thing full of old wounds and stubborn hope. "Wherever the road lets me," he said. "Maybe home, maybe somewhere new, maybe just forward." The man laughed, the sound shaky but real. "Forward," he echoed. "Yeah, maybe that's enough." Together they walked away from the station, the gravel crunching under their boots, the day slowly gathering itself around them like a cloak. The truth they carried wasn't lighter now, it wasn't fixed. But somehow, sharing it made it less impossible to bear. And sometimes, Keanu thought, that was the real miracle. Not mending what was broken, but finding someone willing to sit with you among the ruins. The road stretched ahead, slick with the night's last tears. They walked side by side in silence, their steps unhurried, as if neither wanted to break whatever fragile grace was holding the moment together. The town was just beginning to stir. Distant sounds floated through the mist, the clatter of delivery trucks, the bark of a stray dog, the slow rattle of shutters being drawn back from sleepy windows. They passed a bakery, its windows glowing gold against the blue-gray dawn. The scent of warm bread curled into the air, wrapping around them like a benediction. The man stopped, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his gaze fixed on the window display. Rows of fresh loaves, imperfect and beautiful, lined up like offerings. "I used to work at a place like that," he said quietly, "back when I thought dreams were small things you could carry in your pockets." Keanu smiled, soft and knowing. "Maybe they still are," he said. "You just forget how to feel their weight sometimes." The man chuckled under his breath, a sound lighter than any he'd made all night. Inside the baker, a round, gray-haired woman caught sight of them and gave a small, tentative wave. Without thinking, Keanu raised a hand in return, the simple kindness passing between them like a thread, stitching something unseen. They moved on, their steps turning toward the edge of town where the fields began again, wide and open under the slowly brightening sky. At the crest of a small hill, they paused. The horizon was bleeding colors now, soft golds and bruised purples, the rain clouds shredding into ribbons against the coming sun. The man sank down onto the damp grass, not caring that it soaked through his jeans. He drew his knees up, resting his arms across them. Keanu lowered himself beside him, stretching his long legs out, hands splayed behind him in the wet earth. For a long time, they said nothing. They simply watched the light grow stronger, pushing back the remnants of night. Finally, the man spoke, voice rough but steadier now. "I don't know if I can fix anything," he said. "Not the mess I made, not the things I left broken." Keanu nodded slowly. "Maybe it's not about fixing," he said. "Maybe it's about carrying it better, about choosing different every day." The man turned his face toward him, really looking at him. "And if I fail again?" he asked. Keanu's smile was crooked, almost boyish in its honesty. "Then you get back up," he said. "You forgive yourself again, You try again. That's the work. The man closed his eyes against the rush of emotion swelling inside him. Not the drowning kind this time, but something else. Something cleaner. Hope. Small. Imperfect. But real. The sun crested the horizon fully now, spilling molten gold across the wet fields, setting every droplet ablaze. Keanu tipped his head back, letting the warmth touch his face, his hair, the scarred parts of him no one ever saw. The man pulled the remnants of the letter from his pocket, the scraps barely holding together. He let them fall from his hand, scattering into the grass like seeds. Not erasing the past, not denying it, but letting it return to the earth, where maybe, just maybe, it could grow into something better. They sat there, two specks in the endlessness, sharing the first clean breath of a new day. No promises made, no grand declaration. Only presence, only light, only the simple, stubborn decision to keep going. After a while, Keanu rose, brushing the dew from his jeans. He extended a hand without speaking. The man took it, the grip firm and sure. They walked down the hill together, into the gold and green of the waking world, leaving the night and everything it had broken and mended. And somewhere inside both of them, a small door creaked open. Not wide, not all at once, but enough to let the first light in. They didn't say goodbye. There was no need. At the crossroads just beyond the fields, their paths split naturally. One road curling back toward the town, the other leading deeper into the country, where the hills swallowed the horizon. Keanu paused for a moment, offering a nod, a quiet benediction. The man nodded back, a faint real smile lifting his face for the first time all night. Then he turned and walked away, hands in his pockets. The ruined letter no longer clutched like an anchor but left behind with the soaked earth and the rising sun. Keanu watched him go until he was just a silhouette against the morning light. Not a man defeated by grief, but a man reshaped by it. He adjusted the strap of his worn backpack and turned toward the road ahead. The world smelled of wet grass and fresh beginnings. He didn't know where he was going next, not really. Maybe that was the point. He reached into his jacket pocket absent-mindedly, and his fingers brushed something unexpected. He pulled it out, a scrap of paper. One piece of the letter the man had torn and left behind. Keanu turned it over carefully. Only a few words had survived the rain and the tearing, but they were enough. "I'm sorry, I love you." He stood there for a long moment, the paper fluttering slightly in the breeze. These three simple words, battered, imperfect, carried a kind of purity that all the grand speeches in the world could never match. He folded the scrap neatly and slipped it back into his jacket. Not to save it as a memento, not to clutch it like some sacred relic, knocking him off to relief the room, but to carry it forward, because sometimes the messages we fail to deliver still find their way. Sometimes the words we think are lost still echo where they are needed most. And sometimes just the act of trying to speak, even too late, even imperfectly, is enough to change everything. Keanu started down the road, his boots kicking up small sprays of rainwater from the gravel. Ahead, the landscape opened wide, vast and unpromised. Behind him, the station shrank into mist and memory. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last shreds of night. The air grew warmer, and somewhere off to the east, birds stirred into flight, their cries sharp and sweet against the endless sky. Keanu adjusted his stride, settling into a pace he could hold for miles. There was no hurry now, no finish line to chase, just the long, winding path of being human, of showing up, of carrying what mattered forward, one step, one breath, one imperfect, stubborn act of love at a time. In his pocket, the scrap of the letter warmed against his heart. And though he walked alone, he no longer felt lonely. Not really, because somewhere out there, in every hand held, every silent vigil kept, every apology whispered too late but still meant, someone else was walking too. And that was enough.